Yes, a couple of points. You mentioned the Cold War ending, or the Cold War getting restarted. In fact, Tim, it really never ended. The Soviet Union collapsed, but things went on, and the American plans date to the very early 90s, when it was determined that the Americans, with the Europeans in tow, as you suggest, would expand eastward, taking into the NATO umbrella, if possible, or otherwise bringing into the Western neoliberal economic framework as much territory as they could right up to Russia's borders. If you don't understand that, you cannot understand what is going on in Ukraine today and the enormous amount the Western media are leaving out.
But there was, at least on Russia's part, an understanding that that particular point, that NATO expansion would not carry on right up to the borders of Russia. And indeed, when disarmament and denuclearization of Ukraine was taking place, that was a very overt commitment from the USA and NATO not to try to suck Ukraine into that orbit, was there not?
Yes, there was. President Putin has maintained repeatedly, notably in the speech he gave to the Federal Council a month or two ago, that Russia has been deceived and misled repeatedly in the post-Soviet context. This is what he's talking about.
Why do the Western media then, why do you believe there's been this willingness to paint Russia as the aggressor and indeed the bad guy in this story?
It is a great question, and I think it comes down to this. The Western media, notably the American media, had a very bad Cold War. Their relations with power became very, very corrupted, and I don't think they've ever recovered. Ukraine is a continuation of that relationship, and it's put the Western media, the American media, let's keep it there, into a state of crisis, because the whole thing the relationship between power and media has suddenly become so radically exposed. They are not doing anything differently than they have done all along. It is just more extreme because the official story is so flimsy, leaving the media holding the bag, having to repeat entirely implausible accounts of what's happened, and they're rather stuck. But it is the consequence of rather collapsed ethics and standards that go back a long, long time.
But Patrick Smyth, you yourself were bureau chief for the International Herald Tribune in the Far East, in Tokyo and Hong Kong. I mean, you are seriously suggesting that there is a corrupt relationship between the American media and the government, the powers that be?
I lived it, Tim. You're right. I was a Herald Tribune correspondent for many, many years.
But don't American journalists hold themselves up as paragons of virtue? They're the people that exposed Watergate. They're there to shine a light on the truth, even if that is unpalatable to the government.
Yeah, there are exceptions. They're very good moments. They're very fine moments. I was just watching one this morning, a program called Frontline about the exposure of the NSA affair. Right? Excellent stuff. But that's not to say when questions of ideology and the American story about what it is doing in the world, these are quite sensitive matters. That's when our media get into trouble.
And you've singled out in this current article, you've singled out what you call the stupidity, prejudice and reflexive compliance of the New York Times. Again, the New York Times, a very respected organ. Some would claim it, one of the best newspapers in the world. What are they doing wrong in your view?
I mentioned earlier a corrupted relationship with power. Our society will not work unless media are freestanding, in the very old phrase, fourth estate, right? They are a pole of power on their own. The Times is the most important paper in the country without any question. You can't talk about any other media in America without talking about the Times, because all the other media take their cues from the Times. I've been there. I know how it works. And the Times, by any reasonable account, has drawn radically too close to political power, corporate power, and I would say financial power by way of its exposure to the stock market.
With specific reference to the story in Ukraine, where do you think the New York Times has strayed over the line of impartiality or has been pushing an agenda?
Well, I suppose you could answer in the particular or in the general. In the general, the presentation as a whole is quite drastically tilted against the Russian position, the position of many millions of Ukrainians, and quite drastically in favor of the provisional government in Kiev. And this has required, I would put it there, its portrayal of the provisionals in Kiev has required repeated use of what I call, in my own little universe, the power of leaving out. Okay, you must leave things out often. It's not a matter of what you say; it's a matter of what you don't say. And the general American understanding of the provisionals in Kiev is very warped. Most people around where I am sitting now have very, very little idea of who these people are, number one, and how they got there, number two. The support lent to them by the Americans and secondarily the West Europeans.
What sort of reaction have you had from fellow journalists, or indeed some of these august publications you're accusing of laziness at best? Do you expect to be able to write for them again?
Certainly not. No, that's not how the game's played. I have had quite a lot of silence. I've had some objection, and I've had some approval. And then I would say a fourth category, some silent approval, which is, as a category, probably a little bit larger than the approval category, if you see what I mean. I don't think I am saying things that many people don't think. It's just that I've entirely by design, Tim, determined that at this moment in our country's predicament, one must say the unsayable, and it is the best way I know how to be an honest commentator and stay true to one's ethics.
How would you characterize the relationship that the USA has had with Russia in the Obama years? Because he was famously going to reset the reset. He was going to supposedly rekindle the rapprochement, if you like. Are you saying that was a fake idea, or are you saying that things changed, or are you saying that they decided that Russia was a more aggressive ally than they first thought? Where did it all go wrong?
Well, to begin with, I think the Obama people, and I include Secretary of State Kerry, are foreign relations are not their strong suit. Obama is a domestic man. He was automatically, from day one, in over his head with a lot of these complex relationships, and one of them most certainly was Russia. Okay, I think Obama, you give the man credit. When he started talking about reset, I don't think it's his term, but it was adopted by the administration. I'm certain they meant it, or I'm reasonably certain they meant it. However, I don't think it was an attempt to mislead. I think you better define it as a non-starter from the first, because Obama inherited a defense and security apparatus and a neoliberal economic strategy that were not of his making, and he wasn't in any way in a position to counter any of them. And that went on without interruption, and Obama became more or less beside the point. And so reset has hit the skids. Everybody knows that.
But who is driving the agenda, which one might loosely call anti-Russian, or who is it that is painting Russia as the perennial bad guy?
Well, Tim, it's in the water we drink, you know. I don't think you can point to an institution. I think intelligence and defense are certainly a very large part of it. But even there, and then the political policy, you know, the State Department people. Okay, you had prior to Kerry, you had the phenomenon one of my readers calls the Hillary Hawks. Right? These are liberals. They're basically the holdovers. They're the inheritors of Cold War liberals. Okay, but you can't point to a single institution. It's in the American way of thinking. This was the point of my last column. We have a Cold War consciousness to outgrow, but and we've barely started that. But we have a much older and deeper idea of Russia and quotation marks the East as the great other of the West and notably the Americans, and so it suffuses all institutions. I think that's probably a complicated answer, but it's the best I can do.
And in short, briefly, and you would characterize that principally as a lazy attitude.
There's a lot of intellectual sloth in it, yes. I mean, I don't think you can expect your average American person any more than you could expect your average Russian person to be very, very focused on American behavior abroad and so on and so forth. They take as decently accurate what they are told in the media. But there are other people who are responsible. Policy people, they should have a better sense of history. Journalists, they should have a better sense of their place in this society and the profound responsibility they bear. They don't. There's no evidence of that. And when you get to the policy people, as I've noted in numerous columns, there is no imagination, no idea that we're in a new century. We need new approaches, new relationships with virtually the entire world. And we have a couple of alternatives. We can do it with grace and imagination, or we can do it by making one mess after another, and that's what you got in Ukraine.